to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, January 30th, 2015, end of the month, final Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Coming up on the weekend here, including Super Bowl Sunday, and the corporate media is already out there with all the puff pieces with the cheerleaders, and they're still rattling around with Deflategate, and it's going to have absolutely no impact on the game whatsoever, except there are now special security protections around the footballs. I guess the footballs have to go through a metal detector or something before they're allowed on the field here. And I don't mean to trivialize it. Obviously, the Super Bowl would be a perfect target for a false flag terror attack or a major distraction for somebody doing something else in the world they don't want Americans paying attention to. So we have to keep that in mind. All right, the phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And looks like we got our Skype gremlins to go away, and we have a clear signal today. All righty, interesting story coming out of Rick Rozoff. U.S. Army trains for new war in Europe. And he's talking about this new war game. 2,000 participants from Canada, Hungary, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and the United States are participating in this exercise basically through tomorrow. It's called Allied Spirit 1. And it's designed to provide multinational interoperability training at brigade and battalion levels to enhance U.S. and alliance effectiveness. And you would think that after 2 world wars on their front lawns, Europe would prefer that the third one take place somewhere else. But it looks like the people of Europe don't really have much say in this at all. Story out of ABC, no less. NATO is deploying small units in 6 Eastern European nations to help coordinate a spearhead force in response to Russia's aggressions in Ukraine. And the units are located in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Bulgaria, and Romania. So, now the United States has admitted they spent $5 billion, with a B, to overthrow the elected government of Ukraine a year ago, which has led to this ongoing mess. And it looks like the new government of Ukraine is starting to fragment. And we have Ukraine's top general now on the record as saying there are no Russian troops fighting in eastern Ukraine. Period. End of discussion. This, of course, pulls the rug out from underneath Obama and the war hawks who want to get a war with Russia going over there in eastern Ukraine. Pulls the rug out from Poroshenko, who every 2 weeks is crying wolf, Russian wolf. Now, we have been hearing murmurs of a possible internal coup against Poroshenko involving units of the military who are just fed up with what's going on. And maybe this top general is part of it. But things are not going good in Ukraine. There is a hacker group in Ukraine, Cyberberkut, who have found and published documents showing an accurate picture of what's going on in eastern Ukraine. Kiev has lost 1,100 soldiers over the last 2 weeks, more than 100 tanks and other military vehicles destroyed. There's poor discipline because these conscripts are being sent to the east without adequate training. Major problems with defection, simply running away or in many cases joining the other side. And we're hearing this from multiple sources. Over at Vesti.ru, they have footage shot in the eastern Ukraine which seems to suggest that some 8,000 Kiev soldiers are now surrounded and cut off. And apparently the eastern Ukrainians are sending in the message, lay down your arms and you'll just be allowed to go home. Just quit fighting us, go home. That's it. Which strikes me as a very, very reasonable offer. But Poroshenko is still trying to convince the Western Ukrainians that, yes, we are victorious, we are marching forward. If it wasn't for Vladimir Putin, we would have done this already. And, of course, Obama and the war hawks here in the United States are trying to tell you that, oh, yes, this is democracy in action, and it's all falling apart on them here. Now, the European Union is already very upset over the idea that Greece may vote against further Russian sanctions. Now we've got the president of the Czech Republic coming out openly saying no more sanctions. It's counterproductive. We can't isolate Russia. We need them economically. We need them for trade. So it looks like this whole attempt to provoke Russia further is beginning to fall apart. So they're shifting back to Iran, I guess, here. Article out of the Jerusalem Post, wringing their hands over the fact that Obama has agreed to 80% of Iran's demands in nuclear talks. He can't agree with Iran. And they're basically going back to that whole situation that unless Iran is smashed, they're hovering at a breakout point where they could build a nuclear weapon in mere months. And they've been making this same claim since the 1980s. Iran is 6 weeks away from a bomb. Iran is 2 months away from a bomb. And it hasn't happened yet. And all of this accusation is coming from a nuclear-armed nation that refuses to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, refuses IAEA inspections, has been caught trying to sell clandestine nuclear weapons to other nations. And they're out there saying Iran's the bad guy. Iran is playing by the rules. Everything they are doing, they are allowed to do under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran has signed and ratified, and so has the United States. When the United States uses the threat of military force to coerce Iran to surrender their rights under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, it is the United States that is in violation of international law. It is the United States that is failing to live up to its international obligations. And remember, Iran has not invaded or attacked another country in a war of conquest in over 200 years. It's not their nature. They're being attacked. They were attacked by Iraq as a proxy for the United States of America, and Israel's certainly considering attacking them. But Iran does not start wars historically. It's quite a contrast to Israel and the United States, which these days can't seem to go 6 months without bombing or drone striking or attacking somebody. Story out of warisacrime.org. Apparently, despite serious concerns about toxic after effects, permanent contamination, massive birth defects, the Pentagon is continuing to use depleted uranium munitions in Iraq, primarily as shells in the A-10 tank destroyer aircraft, and they're refusing to say how much is being deployed. They don't want to talk about it. Yes, we may contaminate Iraq for the next 4 billion years, but it's a small price to pay for victory. It's one of the most dangerous mindsets of the military mind. We must have victory now, and we don't care what it costs the future. Now, Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah delivered a speech today in which he said they're no longer going to go along with this idea that there's a Lebanese front and a Syrian front or anything else. He says basically, as far as they're concerned, Israel is aggressing across a common front that spans multiple nations, and they're going to start responding to it that way. I wish he'd kept his mouth shut. It's going to be seen as a provocation, but he's right. This is a wide area regional war being ginned up by Israel, but blamed on the other guy, as is Israel's normal practice here. We got to take a break for commercials. When we come on back, the Netanyahu congressional speech scandal looks like it may be blowing up in his face. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we got callers on the line I'm going to get to in just a minute, but I did want to get to this story. This issue of Netanyahu being invited by Boehner to address a joint session of Congress without going through the State Department is turning into a major political fracas between the executive and the legislative branches. Boehner, I'm convinced, is in violation of the Logan Act. And it's actually prompted a huge backlash even from Israel's supporters in the United States of America. Nancy Pelosi is saying that if Netanyahu goes forward with the speech, there are going to be consequences. Even Abe Foxman over at the ADL is saying this is not a good idea. Because Netanyahu is rubbing the American people's noses in the fact that Israel's calling the shots in Washington, D.C. And while Israel wants to control Washington, D.C., they know that it's going to work only as long as the American people are oblivious to it. And Netanyahu risks that. And it looks like they're already trying to find a fall guy. There's talk that the White House may order the speech to be canceled. And apparently there's a signal that Ron Dermer, the Israeli ambassador, is going to be the fall guy for this scandal. They're going to jettison him to protect the higher-ups. All right, let's get some phone calls here. We're going to go with Steve in Pennsylvania. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, thanks for taking my call. Appreciate the show, appreciate everything you do. I just want to ask a couple of things real quick, and then I'll hang up and see if you'll talk about them. Greece. I know that you just said a moment ago that, and I know I heard the other day that they opposed the sanctions being extended for Russia, but I promised this morning on NPR, I heard something that they said Greece has come around and voted for it. I've looked for it on the news. I can't find it anywhere. I was just wondering if I'd missed anything.
I haven't seen anything to support that.
I promise I heard it this morning. I haven't found it, but maybe I was not enough coffee.
Or maybe it's NPR.
Yeah, that's true. Second thing I was going to ask is I was wondering when the audio came out for the Japanese prisoner that was being held, why was he speaking in English?
Well, because it's aimed for an American market.
That's what I figured.
Yep.
Thanks, Mike.
All right.
Have a good day.
All right, we're going to let you go, and I'm going to take the calls out of order here, and we're going to go with Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Yeah, just the previous call. I didn't hear anything about that, but that might just be for the extension of the sanctions that are already on, not any new sanctions.
Well, I know that it could be, and I will look into it over the next break here, but, Tsipras right now is in, if you'll pardon the expression, the honeymoon period of his administration. And he cannot afford to say one thing and then do another in the eyes of those Greek voters who may have voted him into office, but they're still not sure about him yet. And Tsipras has to understand that his name on the office door is written in dry erase marker right now. So he's going to be very careful to not have any public contradictions.
Hey, Mike, yesterday when I called, we didn't know too many resources that Greece had or commodities. What about the natural gas reserves off of Crete?
Yeah, they've got natural gas, they've got olive oil, they've got ouzo. I had a lot of people sending in about all the various Greek industries. There's still a large market for natural sponges for high-end customers, and Greece is supplying that. They do a lot of fishing and export of fishing products as well. And it's a great place for tourism.
Yeah, that too. All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch over here to John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Just for the point of accuracy and clarity, the piece you put on whatreallyhappened.com, your website, Putin sends nuclear bombers over the English Channel with the transponders turned off, invisible to air traffic control. They're not. Normal radar returns will illuminate those aeroplanes. They just won't have the transponder code return with the radar signal. That little square yellow box at the side of the dot on the screen won't have that number in. So they won't know who it is, but they certainly will be able to see the aeroplane as it flies down the channel.
Well, I'm afraid your understanding of air traffic control radar is a little mistaken. They can switch into skin paint mode, but during normal operation of air traffic, an air traffic control radar, in order to avoid clutter from VFR traffic and non-transpondered traffic, it's tracking transponders only. And if an aircraft turns off the transponder, it'll disappear. It won't appear at all. There won't be a mark. There won't be a data block. And that's done to keep that display simple so that all they're looking at are the transpondered targets that they are supposed to be interacting with. Now, military radar...
You're talking about civilian air traffic control. I'm talking military. And as soon as that transponder goes off, bells and whistles and all sorts of alarms go off.
The article seemed to indicate that we were talking about civilian air traffic control radars. Military radars are always basically in search mode, and they will use the transponders to identify the targets. And that's how I presume that's how they knew there was something there that needed to be checked out. But again, I think Putin is flexing his muscles between this, the Donald Cook incident, detecting and chasing off a Virginia-class submarine in their waters. Putin is demonstrating that war with Russia is not going to be the slam dunk that all the sales brochures for the defense contractors are promising it will be.
Yeah, well, I thought these Virginia-class submarines were supposed to be stealthy.
Well, that's what the sales brochures said, and we actually have one of them stationed here in Pearl Harbor, which seems to spend most of its time at the dock, just as a observation there. But yeah, the Virginia class was supposed to be the latest and greatest in stealthy fast attacks, and apparently the Russians were able to detect it and drive it off.
Yep. Okay then, Michael. Yeah, there's one other point I would like to make about this Ukrainian situation. My people who I talk to, who shall be nameless for obvious reasons, are indicating that the situation is far, far worse than even this military officer is claiming.
Which military officer are we talking about? I mean, the one
that said there's no Russians in there and what have you.
Okay, well, he was not describing the situation in terms of the tactical realities on the ground in eastern Ukraine. We're getting that from a Ukrainian hacker group and from some other sources. But look how long this has gone on. We're basically at a year since the collapse, the overthrow of Ukraine's legitimately elected government, and it's still going on. And even with all these American mercenaries going in there and the U.S. supplied weapons, they can't prevail. And Kiev's own forces at this point, they're demoralized, they're hungry, they're ill-equipped, and, you know, it's throwing more young, untrained conscripts. All they're going to do is stop the bullets. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And now ITAR-TASS is confirming the reports we were getting from other sources earlier. Apparently, the Donetsk People's Republic militia has surrounded and blocked off from retreat 8,000 Kiev troops. And they're stating their intention is to save their lives. And apparently there are already desertions from the surrounded Kiev forces over to Donetsk. They're coming up and saying, look, we're on your side. We think Kiev is full of it. Now, their report is that closer to 1,200 Ukrainian servicemen have been killed. Well, they're saying since operations in eastern Ukraine, but the hacker group is saying 1,100 just over the last week. But this is a major, major defeat for Kiev. Will it stop them? Of course not. They're just trying to figure out a way they can send more Americans there. And not those expensive Blackwater mercenaries. They're talking about the cheap option, your sons over there. All right, getting on back down to Israel. One of the reasons Netanyahu seems to be running around hysterically is he's looking at elections coming up in March, and it is far from a foregone conclusion that he is going to win re-election. And there is a strong center-left alliance that has pulled together with the aim of getting Netanyahu out there. And they're calling it the Zionist camp. It includes Labor Party leader Isaac Herzog. They've even got former Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni, who I'm not all that thrilled about because of her penchant for distorting the truth. But apparently even Israel's government is saying Netanyahu has become a serious, serious liability. And there's another article following up on that at the original antiwar.com. Bibi Netanyahu and the myth of the special relationship. Every time we question U.S. support for Israel, oh, there's a special relationship. Okay, can you tell me what that actually, oh, it's a special relationship. You know, what is it? They paying you, bribing you, they got blackmail stuff on you, were you in Jeff Epstein's little black book? But more, and over at former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Martin Indyk, founder of the Saban Center at the Brookings Institute, is saying Netanyahu is just using the Congress as a photo op for his election campaign. And the GOP are using Bibi for their campaign against Obama. And the special relationship between the U.S. and Israel is going to be damaged by this. And we're hearing that from all over the place, from Nancy Pelosi, from Abe Foxman. I think it'd be a good thing. So go on, Bibi, do the speech, because the American people need to understand that Washington, D.C. takes their money, sends their children off to die in wars, but isn't really interested in what's good for the United States and the American people. They're obsessed with what's good for Israel. And I think at this point, probably most Americans are sitting there and they're scratching their brow and thinking about all these photographs we have seen of American political candidates traveling to Israel to get their photograph taken, touching the Wailing Wall, with their head bowed, looking somber. Because that seems kind of an odd thing to do for an American political candidate running for office in the United States, doesn't it? Now, in ancient Rome, people who were in the government in the conquered provinces were expected to travel to Rome to make obeisance to the emperor. That was the stamp of their legitimacy to rule in their own country with the blessing of Rome. And Israel's doing the same thing now with us, and I don't like it. Israel has just announced they're going to build an additional 450 homes in the West Bank past the Green Line. And already there's a backlash. The United States and Great Britain are both speaking out in condemnation of the announcement, saying it will inflame tensions, which is certainly right. But what's really significant is seeing Great Britain and the United States come out and say, look, you shouldn't do this anymore. And it tells us that Israel's iron grip on these governments, and for that matter the media, is starting to slip. And you and I and everybody we know, we need to get some 30 weight, start dumping it all over Israel's talons, because they are. More and more people are willing to stand up and say Israel's wrong, Israel's doing bad things, Israel's committing war crimes. And I think most Americans, made aware of the extent to which Israel has subverted our government, are not going to be happy with that. I remember when I was a kid growing up in grade school, and we got all the little film strips and presentations about watching out for communist subversion of the U.S. government. We were always looking over Russia. They're coming to subvert our government. And it turned out our government was being subverted. We were just tricked into looking at the wrong direction. Because it wasn't the communists who were subverting the U.S. government. It was Israel. Now, over in France, people are still responding to this story about an 8-year-old Muslim kid who refused to chant, I am Charlie, I am Charlie, I am Charlie, saying that he couldn't agree with Charlie Hebdo's portrayal of Muhammad, and for that matter, the Pope and Jesus. And so he was taken in by the authorities for questioning, for sympathizing with terrorists. And what's going on here is that the Muslim community in France, probably a lot of the non-Muslims, certainly a lot of them over here, no, this was a false flag attack. It's a fake. And the public school system in France has been given their orders. You will brainwash and browbeat all those little kids to believing the official story. And those with courage are standing up and saying, no, I don't believe the official story. You're lying to me. Go ahead, call the cops. Not going to change a thing. You know, these are kids. They're waking up And even they're picking up on this odd story about, yeah, this guy left his ID card in the car. Sure, we're going to believe that one. And so France is acting like any government does when the big lie is exposed. They're coming down to oppress those who know it's a lie. Now, speaking of oppression and breaking free from, very interesting article over here in Alternet, the country that refuses to bow down to Western bankers. And, of course, they're talking about Greece putting in an anti-austerity government and saying, we repudiate the debt, we renegotiate, or we're out of here. And, by the way, they're not the first. Remember, Iceland did it first. And the response of the private central bankers around the world was to just look the other way and pretend that Iceland didn't exist. You don't hear a lot about Iceland and how they're doing in the American corporate media, do you? They don't want you to know how well it worked out. It's going to be a little bit harder to pretend that Greece doesn't exist. And what the EU and ECB are really worried about is Greece deciding to leave the European Union, and then things get better in that country. And that's going to get everybody else in the European Union to say, you know, this whole European Union was a really raw deal. This whole European Central Bank thing. It's great for the bankers, not for us. Apparently over in Greece, those people who are able to are taking their money out of the banks, buying gold, because they know there's an upset coming. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, Webster Tarpley has a new article out called An Examination of How Syriza Won in Greece. And basically says Syriza won because they truly were representing what was going to be best for Greece and the Greek people. And it resulted in such overwhelming support that they were able to win this election. Remember, they won the elections the last time, but not by a wide enough margin to simply say, we're the government. And the pro-banker party refused to form a coalition, forcing a second election, which was marked by massive and obvious vote fraud. They were taking ballot boxes in the pro-Syriza precincts and just setting them on fire in the town square. Say, so much for democracy, cradle of democracy. You will do what the bankers tell you. And this time the Greek people said no. And part of what's angering them is the awareness that the Troika are demanding the people of Greece work and sacrifice to pay a huge debt, half of which was created out of thin air by fraud. It is, by any reasonable definition of the term, an odious debt for which the people should not be held responsible. And frankly, if the Troika, in particular Christine Lagarde over at the IMF, had agreed and said, yeah, that half of the debt, we're just going to pretend that doesn't exist, we wouldn't be here today. This is where the greed of the money junkies clouds their better judgment. And of course, this election victory has shocked the power centers of Europe, who are just used to the idea that they can rig any election to get what they want, like they did up in Scotland. But they can't reverse a landslide, which is what happened. Which is why now we're getting all this thing about Greece as a hub for terrorists. They're already getting ready to invade Greece, kick out Syriza, and bring them back into the slavery of the bankers. That's what's going on here. Now, the European Union, the ECB, the IMF, well, the Troika, are maintaining their hardline position. There is absolutely no discussion of canceling any of the debt, even the part arrived at by fraud. And as long as they maintain that hardline position, Tsipras has no choice but to maintain his hardline position. All right, we're going to leave the European Union. And the EU is they're in a corner. They can't reduce Greece's debt to keep them in the European Union without all the other nations saying, hey, cut some of ours off as well. But if Greece leaves the EU and defaults on the debt, that will trigger all the credit default swaps sold against Greece's debt. It's a no-win situation. Which is why Greece is a hub of terrorism. We will go in there and solve this problem by bombing them to seeing our way. Now, it turns out, and this is an article over at antiimperialista.org, it turns out there's already a growing movement across all of Europe opposing the ECB and the euro. And it involves political parties in France, Spain, and Austria. Apparently the Finnish Independence Party has joined in. They're forming a coalition to say it is time for the euro and the EU to go away. And of course, you're not going to hear about that in the corporate media. Just like you don't hear about how good things are in Iceland right now. Now here's a warning flag coming out of Investment Watch blog. A member of the European Parliament for the Podemos Party from Spain is out there warning them already. The Spanish people are desperate. If Brussels and the ECB do not start cutting some slack, there could be an outright revolt. Certainly, Spain will be, the Spanish people will be emboldened by Greece to get together and say, let's vote in anybody who says they'll oppose austerity and that private central bank. But here you have a member of the European Parliament saying Spain has been pushed to outright revolt against the bankers by this. But again, the problem is you're not dealing with reasonable people. When you're dealing with private central bankers, you're dealing with money junkies. You're dealing with people who are seriously mentally ill because they're addicts. They're addicted to other people's wealth. And just like cocaine addicts, heroin addicts, meth addicts, they're not thinking clearly. All they're thinking about is that next fix of somebody else's wealth that they can pump into their veins. Now here's an interesting little piece of propaganda. This is over at the Daily Mail in Great Britain. I'm just going to give you the headline. Suicide bomber camels, goats, cows, and donkeys are being prepared to carry out attacks for Boko Haram, says the Nigerian government. And for that reason, we need your assistance to transfer $1,384,000,000,014 out of Nigeria to the United States, for which you will be paid 10%. Please send your name and bank details and a small good faith fee of $5,000. Boko Haram is the original Nigerian scam here. Speaking of Christine Lagarde on the IMF, like so many other people around the world, she's out there lauding the late King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, and she actually made the statement. This is Christine Lagarde, head of the IMF, regarding Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah. Quote, he was a strong advocate of women, end quote. That's like saying Christine Lagarde is an advocate for the poor. I think people ought to listen to that statement by her and say, and this lady is like directing the economy of so many nations, or influencing the economy of so many nations, and she's this deranged? All right, talking about the economy, earnings are down, durable goods orders are falling, and the markets were tumbling. I didn't look at the final numbers to see if the plunge protection team were able to massage the market for a happy ending, and no, it doesn't look like they did by a wide margin. Oh, big steep drop at the end. Dow ended 251 down. No traditional Friday happy ending. That's going to upset all the money junkies. They won't be able to fully enjoy the Super Bowl because they'll be fretting about Monday. Chevron is slashing 23% of their Pennsylvania workforce. That's a major hit. The U.S. rig count, meaning how many wells are being drilled or pumped, collapses to June 2010 lows. This is an 8-week decline in the number of producing wells or exploratory wells in the United States of America. Chevron has also canceled, or at least suspended, its stock buyback program, claiming there's a cash flow squeeze, which certainly could be true. Or they may realize that oil prices are going to go a lot lower, their own stock is going to take a major drop, and they're harboring what cash they have to buy their stock back when it's at a much lower price than it is today. Texas oil well permits fell 50% since October, lowest level since 2012. It's all coming apart that. Al Franken had an interesting comment about the shale oil industry, which is out there proclaiming that they are leading the United States into new energy independence. As it turns out, the reality is the shale oil companies didn't do anything. All of this research that led to shale oil was done by the U.S. Department of Energy and paid for by you, the United States taxpayers. They just hopped on for a free ride. Canada's gross domestic product shrinks on biggest factory drop in 6 years. Canadian dollar plunged below 79 cents U.S. Nobody's able to buy their product, and a big part of that is Canada taking a hit on oil and gas prices. This oil price war launched against Russia is turning into a gigantic planet-wide petard. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. We're talking about the economy, and the news is bad from pretty much all over the world, unless you happen to be one of the 0.1%, and you're doing great. So why would you be listening to this show? Apparently the Mexican peso and the Brazilian real are collapsing. And here's a very interesting story. Not too long ago, Mark Carney made a claim that Britain had escaped the debt trap that was afflicting all the Eurozone states. And apparently, British economist Michael Burke is saying this is delusional. Burke says Britain's debt has merely been transferred from private firms to British homeowners. This is how they manage the debt. They don't get rid of it because it's impossible. They just spread it around all over the place. Now, when all the currency of any nation is loaned into circulation at interest, there is no escape possible from the debt trap. That's just the way it is, because private central banks, or even a nationalized bank, because the Bank of England is now nationalized after World War II, but they still operate the same way. All the money in circulation begins as a loan at interest, which guarantees the debt will always exceed the money supply. That's what keeps you in the debt trap. So Michael Burke is correct. Mark Carney is being delusional, saying that Britain has escaped the debt trap. They can't. It's all the more ironic because they helped invent it. And Britain should remember that the United States fought the revolution to break free of the Bank of England's predatory practices. Maybe it's time for Britain to follow our example. Learn from us colonials, as it were. Article out of PatriotRising.com, almost half of U.S. households exhaust their salaries, which basically says when the money comes in, it immediately goes right back out. There's nothing left over. Nothing for savings, nothing for rainy day, nothing for luxuries, or anything that isn't an absolute necessity, which is another reason why retail is collapsing in this country. In fact, there's an interesting story over at Investment Watch blog pointing out that the claimed growth in consumer spending since 2009 has all come from those 1% households. The upper income people, they still have money to spend at the shopping malls, but they're a tiny part of the population. Alrighty, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Steve in California. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Steve, are you... Oh, hang on. Let's try that again. Steve, are you there? Steve, are you there? Going once, going twice. All right, going to put him back on hold. All righty, over in Detroit, as they're dealing with their bankruptcy, they've come up with a great way to come up with more money to give to the bankers they're going to start dropping city employees from their promised health plan. There are people who have dedicated decades of their service to the city and were promised there's a health plan as part of your retirement package. Well, guess what? They're all being cut off. Just go away and die. We got to take the money and give it to the bankers. I can imagine all those former city employees are very upset, not just with the city's bankruptcy, but with the fact that you shouldn't take a promise made by anybody in government seriously. Up in Wisconsin, Governor Scott Walker has cut $300 million from Wisconsin's university system just one day after he proposed spending $220 million on a new sports arena. Huzzah, huzzah, we don't need to educate our young people. They can get student loans, but we're going to spend the taxpayer dollars on a new sports arena. Seems like some seriously distorted priorities, I think. And needless to say, as we mentioned at the top of the show, we're getting a story from Veterans Today, emergency alert, terrorists may attack the Super Bowl, blah, 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 blah. Or there'll be a false flag, or, and I think this is more likely, Israel may uncork on Syria, Lebanon, possibly even Iran on Sunday, while we're all watching to make sure those footballs at the Super Bowl are properly inflated. All righty, looks like we got Steve back. Steve, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, this time we got you. What's on your mind?
Well, I talked to you about the Baltic Dry Index,
yes,
the current one, but I'm just trying to figure out, yesterday was 632, that's the all-time low.
Yes.
And the market went up. And when you talk about massaging the markets, you know how that's being done to manipulate to get the market shares going up. Is that done by falsification, major players falsifying their records, saying their earnings are greater than they really are? Is that how it's done?
Well, a lot of these organizations have been caught falsifying their records, but that is criminally liable. The way the plunge protection team has been working since it was first started back in the Clinton administration is they will get a lot of instant money created from the Federal Reserve, and they will go into the brokerages and they will start buying the indicator issues. Now, when you talk about the Dow Jones Industrial Average, they're not really averaging all the available stocks. They have this little basket of about 30 stocks on which they base this industrial average, and those 30 stocks are the indicator issues. So the plunge protection team, and this was back when most people didn't know they were there, plunge protection team would get a whole bunch of instant money out of the Federal Reserve. They'd go to the brokerage and they'd start buying shares in those indicator issues, and that would drive the Dow up. Then ordinary investors would see the Dow going up and say, oh, I'm going to buy in. And then they would basically reinforce that trend and drive the market higher and higher and higher and higher. But that was then, this is now. And most of the small individual investors are already out of the market. They've either gone broke or they've realized that it's rigged in favor of the big guys. And I think the medium-sized investors who are still there have wised up to what's going on. And now when they see the PPT trying to drive the market up, they take that as a sell signal. And as a matter of fact, just looking at the Dow, it opened, went down. You could see an upshove that peaked about an hour and a half before the close of the market. And at that point, everybody started bailing and just drove it back down again. So I think the PPT's methodology is starting to not work the way they thought it was going to work. And everybody who's in this market understands that, a healthy PE ratio for stocks is somewhere around 13, 14. And we're looking at PE ratios on the current American stock market up 30s, almost 40. It's massively overvalued, more so than just before the crash of 1929. And they understand that all of these major retail corporations are missing their earnings forecast for the fourth quarter. Durable good orders are down. Baltic Dry Index is down. They understand the only thing holding the market up is the fraud, and they're going to take advantage of it. But that's not going to work much longer.
I looked at the 2015 projected store closings for retail, and a lot of the major retailers, of course, we know Sears and Kmart and a lot of those stores, Target's closing all the ones in Canada. But I totaled up just the prospected closures of those stores, 2,544 store closures in the United States.
Yeah, and so let's figure an average of what, 50 employees per store, and you get a number of how that's going to impact the job market. And, of course, those people will no longer have money to go to other stores, which means more stores are going to close. It's a domino effect. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Steve, and we will be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And just to put this whole Baltic Dry Index in perspective, last year in March, the Baltic Dry Index peaked at 1,600. And today it closed at 632. And that will tell you why this is such a serious, serious area of concern. And the corporate media should be covering it, but they're too busy worried about underinflated footballs today. Now, here's a very alarming story coming out of New York City. New York Police Department Commissioner Bill Bratton has unveiled plans for an elite 350-member unit to handle anti-terrorist duties and also large-scale protests. They're calling it the Strategic Response Group, the SRG. And basically they're claiming this is in response to the Charlie Hebdo attack and other things just like it. What is really alarming is that this elite force, in addition to the armored vehicles, body armor, riot gear, tear gas, and the rest of it, they're going to be given full machine guns. Not just semi-automatic AR-15s. Full-on, rapid-fire machine guns to wag at peaceful protesters. This is called intimidation. Now, remember when they were dealing with this criminal at the Empire State Building and 9 bystanders got shot, all by the NYPD? Can you imagine what would have happened if those bozos had fully automatic machine guns? And by the way, talking to that member of Congress who's out there trying to get a resolution to ban body armor, to make it a crime, punishable by 10 years in prison for ordinary Americans to own body armor, I want to hear his explanation of why those 9 innocent bystanders in New York shouldn't be allowed to have body armor. I'm waiting to hear that answer. I think somebody needs to raise that question. Alrighty, the National Fraternal Order of Police is pushing for laws to define anti-police comments as hate speech. The police now want to be considered a protected minority, even though they got tanks and guns and tear gas and machine guns now. They want to criminalize anybody coming out and saying, you know, the police really ought not to be shooting innocent Americans. The police ought to comply with the laws of the land, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And the police ought not to be just taking people's property unless those people are convicted of an actual crime. Those are very reasonable statements to make, and they're protected by the First Amendment. But now the police want to have themselves defined as a protected minority, so you can't say bad things about them. Meanwhile, down on shareeverything.com, there was an interesting little comment where a Florida sheriff was asked, you know, what do you do if protesters are blocking traffic? And his response was, run them over. Now, remember back in Georgia not too long ago, there was this horrific story about a no-knock raid on a house, which involved one of the officers tossing a flashbang grenade into the crib of a baby, causing permanent scarring damage on the child. over $1 million in hospital bills for the parents, which Georgia and the city have already said, we're not going to pay that. We don't have that kind of money. It's your problem. And a Georgia state senator, as a result, has announced a bill to limit the use of no-knock warrants. Because over the last several years, they've gone from the exception to the rule. In other words, they're going to do a no-knock, kick in the door, take you down for parking ticket violations. Now, the police are coming back and saying, or the police union, rather, is coming back and saying, look, you can have safe, drug-free neighborhoods, or you can be free of flashbang burned babies, but you can't have both. It's time for you to make a choice. I'll go with a neighborhood where little kids are not being blown to bloody bits by the police. And I'll take my chance with the criminals myself, because frankly, around here, the police have been useless for that. They're too busy writing tickets to the tourists. Now, the Jessica Hernandez case is beginning to really ramp up, and this basically involves a young lady who was shot and killed in her car. The official story is that she tried to use her car to ram the police and the police car. Apparently, one of the passengers in the car has now gone public, saying that, in point of fact, the police just shot this girl through the windshield. She died, her foot came off the brake, and the car just rolled into the police car. And as usual, the cops just make up a story to justify gunning down another innocent American, and I don't care what this Jessica did. It didn't justify being gunned down in cold blood. And that's where it really has gotten out of control. Police response is supposed to be proportionate. Yes, if you've got a guy holed up in his house with grenades and machine guns, call out the SWAT team. If you've got somebody in a house with his family and baby who, let's say hypothetically, missed a court date, you don't need to kick down the door and blow everybody up for that. Proportionate, proportionate, proportionate. We don't have that anymore. The police are being trained to approach every interaction with an American citizen as if you are Osama bin Laden himself, come back from the grave. And you have a tactical nuclear weapon shoved up your right nostril. Anyway. Story out of WashingtonTimes.com. Benghazi's becoming a hot issue, and it's not going to go away before 2016. And apparently what's coming up is that tapes made in Libya have been recovered from Tripoli, showing that top Pentagon officials and a senior Democrat in Congress did not trust Hillary Rodham Clinton's reasons for going to war in Libya. More about that when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're talking about a new development regarding the war in Libya, and that war was sold to us with Hillary Rodham Clinton's claim that Gaddafi was on the verge of committing mass genocide against his own people. Oh, genocide, we must go in there and give him what for. And apparently, along with 99% of the American people, there were top officials in the Pentagon and a senior Democrat in Congress who did not trust Hillary that this needed to be done, and they opened up their own diplomatic channels with Gaddafi, trying to figure out some way to derail this. And this is all documented on secret audio recordings found in Tripoli. Now, this leads to the next story in the Washington Times, and it's titled, Hillary's WMD Moment, where the intelligence community of the United States of America was saying there was no evidence at all of any impending genocide in Libya. Hillary was just making that up out of thin air to sell you another war. which of course has left Libya in total chaos. And we know what was really going on. Gaddafi shut down the privately owned central bank in Libya and replaced it with a state central bank and a value-based currency, the gold dinar. Then he informed the rest of the world that Libya's oil was for sale, but only for the gold dinar. And the rest of Africa was looking at Libya and saying, yeah, we want to use the gold dinar for our cross-border trade and to sell our natural resources because it's backed by gold. It's got a fixed value. We can rely on it. It's much more trustworthy than the dollar or the euro. And that, of course, made Gaddafi an enemy of the private central bankers, who Hillary's actually working for. And that was the real reason for the invasion. They go on in, they kill Gaddafi, they impose a brand new privately owned central bank on the people of Libya, loaning the public currency at interest. The gold for the gold dinar vanished, and we're talking something like 140 tons. And Libya's oil is back on the world market for sale, but only for the U.S. dollar. That was the reason. All this genocide and nuclear weapons and poison gas, they lie to you to get you to support these wars, because any politician who gets up there and tries to tell the American people, look, we're going to send a whole bunch of your sons and daughters to be killed and crippled because our bankers are greedy and they don't like the other bankers not going along with that. Who would volunteer their kid for that? Nobody. So they make up a lie. They're coming to get you. They're evil Muslims. They've got nuclear weapons of mass destruction. They're gassing their own people. Because in the past it's always worked, but that was the past. The internet, the independent media, have fundamentally transformed the way information flows through society. It's no longer top-down. Lies by the government, repeated by the corporate media, and the people just sit there and have no choice but to accept it. That's 1950s thinking. Mass communication is now peer-to-peer. And the lifespan of a government lie can now be clocked with an egg timer. And the reason this is all going to fall apart is because the people who are still calling the shots, the top advisors, the Henry Kissingers, they're a bunch of old Cold War fossils. They don't get it. They don't see how the world has evolved past them. And they keep making these stupid mistakes. Which, from our point of view, that's a good thing. Now then, we're getting a confirmation. This is over in The Guardian in United Kingdom. An aide for Colin Powell has now confirmed that, yes, the CIA was interrogating suspects on Diego Garcia. It's been suspected. We know there are strange buildings there that cannot be accounted for the purpose of military fortification or preparation or aircraft maintenance. And it was suspected that the United States was sending some of their prisoners to be interrogated, meaning tortured. Let's call it what it was. Diego Garcia was one of the CIA's torture centers, and now we're getting a confirmation of that from one of Colin Powell's aides here. Now, here's another interesting little story about how the U.S. government works. This is from warisacrime.org. And the headline is, CIA tried to give Iraq nuclear plans just like Iraq. And they're going back to the revelations coming out of James Risen and Jeffrey Sterling, where they blew the whistle that the CIA gave Iran blueprints and a diagram and a parts list to build a nuclear bomb. And then the CIA tried to do the same thing for Iraq, using the same former Russian scientists to make the delivery. And all the evidence for this is online at this article here. And this is the way the scam works. Have the CIA give a targeted nation blueprints for a bomb. and then announce they have a weapons program, they're in possession of blueprints of a bomb, and invade. And now they're doing the same thing with Venezuela, with this story we've seen over the last few days about how a disgruntled nuclear American scientist has given nuclear weapon plans to Venezuela. You know, you can go out on the internet and you can get the original blueprints for Fat Man and Little Boy. Doesn't mean you can build one. Especially the uranium bomb, the Little Boy. It's not that difficult. It's a big tube with 2 subcritical masses of fissionable uranium at each end. You slap them together, it goes bang. Having the blueprint doesn't mean anything. It's having the fissionables. But this was just another way to try and sell you on the need to conquer these nations because they're thinking about having nuclear weapons. Well, with the United States invading everybody who doesn't have nuclear weapons, what do you think they're going to do? Anyway, as you probably have already heard on the corporate media, Mitt Romney has decided that he is not going to run for president in 2016. I'm sure Sarah Palin is rejoicing. And already the rush is on by the other GOP hopefuls to Mitt Romney's backers saying, well, Mitt's bowed out, give me your money. And the scramble is on here. And I'm certainly glad he's not going to run. He was never, ever a candidate for the American people. He's another Wall Street puppet. And I hope it sparks a trend of this old guard banker puppet regime deciding maybe it's time to retire, take your ill-gotten gain, go someplace comfortable, live out your life. Now, there's been another apparently unanticipated effect of the Obama immigration amnesty. Apparently, because now these illegals can acquire driver's licenses, it has jammed up the DMV to the point where you have to wait months to get an appointment or just stand in line for a day. Guess they didn't think this one all the way through. We got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And let's see. We're getting a story here now. This is coming out of Wake Up From Your Slumber. Greece's newly elected anti-austerity finance minister, this is the guy who said austerity is fiscal waterboarding of the people, has announced that the new government of Greece will no longer cooperate with the troika of international lenders, IMF, ECB, and so forth, and they're not going to cede aid extension. In other words, what they've said is your opportunity for any kind of a negotiated settlement is now gone. And I think this is telegraphing that Greece is going to leave the European Union, drop the euro, go back to the drachma, and simply say, these debts are not our problem. And they do have a legitimate point of view, at least for that portion of Greece's debt that was created through fraud. They shouldn't be responsible for it. Now, for those of you who don't understand what I'm talking about, I'll go over it one more time. There is a recognized principle in international law called odious debt. And it refers to debts incurred by a government that are not for the benefit of the people. If your government borrows money to build schools, hospitals, roads, bridges, railways, that sort of thing, that's legitimate debt. And the people are considered liable to repay that debt. But if a government is borrowing money for war, for surveillance on its own people, for any military activities that are violations of international law, if they're borrowing money to simply give to somebody else, that is considered odious debt and not the responsibility of the people. And there have been cases where governments have fallen, collapsing under the weight of their debt, and under international law, much of that debt is forgiven for the people. And you need to remember that. Yes, the money junkies' attitude is, we don't care how your government created the debt, you are responsible. But if there is democracy, then the people should have a voice on whether that debt is incurred or not. Unfortunately, over the history of the United States of America, the federal government has not only plunged us into debt, it has done so intentionally to make us slaves to the private central banks. When the United States was founded, there was no private central bank. We fought a war to break free of Britain's private central bank. And the United States started with a very simple financial model. The U.S. government was authorized by the Constitution to coin money, regulate its value. And the government would then spend that money into circulation to buy what the government needed. The money would then flow through commerce without accruing interest, and then be taxed back in the same amount at the end of the cycle to balance the books. That's the system the United States started with, and it resulted in the young United States of America very quickly becoming a manufacturing and agricultural powerhouse, which is why all the European banks, which operate on this will print up ink and paper tickets and loan them into circulation, were very upset with the United States and worked to subvert our economic system, and they succeeded 3 times. First Bank of the United States, Second Bank of the United States, and they were going to call it the Third Bank of the United States, but they wised up and called it the Federal Reserve to trick you into thinking it's part of the government. But it isn't. It's just another privately owned central bank. It's no more federal than Federal Express. So it's looking like, if I read the semaphores correctly, that Greece has just decided there really isn't much point talking to the money junkies because they're hopelessly trapped by their addiction. They won't listen to reason, just like somebody who's in withdrawal from their drugs won't listen to reason that maybe this is a good time to kick. No. You're being unreasonable. I have to have another fix. Financial Times is reporting that Russia continues to stack up on gold. And I'm going to venture a guess here that not too far in the future, Russia will declare that the ruble is now backed at least in part by gold. I think China will probably do exactly the same thing. Very alarming article over at Zero Hedge, predicting that sooner or later the markets are going to realize that the private central banks can't keep things going with their printing presses forever. This is a statement from Charles Plusser, saying there's got to be a snapback at some point. And the longer they wait, the worse that snapback is going to be. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Joe in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. What an honor to speak to you. I give your site out to folks all the time because you link to all of the independent media.
Thank you.
And one of the great sites you've linked me to many years ago is Zero Hedge, and they do a great job of discussing how the market has really moved oftentimes just by statement.
They do a really good job. Yeah.
Like yesterday, they pointed out they do so a great job with charts and graphs how Janet Yellen made a statement which she thought was private to some Democrats, basically telling them, to buy, essentially, to buy the dip. And every time you saw the market rebound off of big-time lows in the last several months, it's been Fed members that just sort of chirped up out of thin air and just sort of suggest that QE might be coming again. And it's just ridiculous.
Well, the QE, they're basically saying the Fed's going to raise rates, and then they keep putting it off. It was going to be in summer, now it's September. And already we're seeing articles, in fact, I've got one here in my talking points, where Yellen is basically going to have to bail on that raising the rate situation, because the instant they do, it's all going to start coming apart. The entire U.S. financial system has, like the money junkies themselves, become addicted, hopelessly dependent on this constant flow of virtually free ink and paper coming out of the Federal Reserve. They can't cut it off without crashing the market.
Absolutely. In fact, they're out of bullets. Years ago, of course, they would tweak interest rates. Now they're down to zero. and then you get into QE, and Peter Schiff does a really good job also of explaining how this works, and he anticipates that, like us, we don't expect rates can rise. They can't raise rates, and in fact, he's predicting that they're going to have to go back to QE4.
Yeah, I agree with him. I absolutely agree with him. They've put themselves into a corner. Like so many of these other mistakes, it was supposed to be a temporary stopgap measure, and then they get into it and realize that, wow, they can't stop it now. They become dependent on it. The market adjusts, the reality adjusts to the new cash flow, and it's absorbed. And we're already seeing all these stories about how the ultra-rich money junkies are already trying to cash out, get their money out of the country, get it down to the Caymans. They're worse preppers than the preppers right now.
Absolutely. And my last point, and thank you so much for everything you do, Mike, is that, of course, we know that central banks pump up the market, and as soon as we ended QE, well, then the Japanese started to print, and then you saw the dollar go from 102 to like 120 to the yen, and then it's like passed off to the ECB for them to do QE. And it's funny because these lies, the macro data comes out. It's also very negative. But, they had to keep up the illusion that the recovery's there, in my opinion, so that they could, so that the ECB would actually go through with QE. Because if they saw our numbers falling apart like they are, they wouldn't have gone through with this. And we don't think it's going to work anyway.
Well, again, we're talking not about the governments of nations, but these private central banks, which are not loyal to the nations in which they operate. They're loyal to themselves and each other. And they're trying to make things look okay by just spreading the debt around uniformly so you don't realize how deep it is and how badly it stinks. But again, that is also something that they cannot keep doing. Something's going to break at some point here. I mean, the fact that the plunge protection team is no longer able to give us our traditional Friday happy ending, I think that's a major signal.
I think so, absolutely. Hey, thanks so much, Mike, to you and Claire. You are all over it, man. Thanks so much.
All right, well, thank you for the kind words. We got to take a break for the news, and we'll be back with hour number 3. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is still in our control room. We're having a marvelous technical day, so pat on the back, Tom. Download a cookie. And we got one more hour to go here, so feel free to call on in. Now, there has been a lot of coverage on the independent media, not a mention on the corporate media, about this ISIS leader arrested in Pakistan who has basically said that he was being funded by the United States government to recruit people from Pakistan, send them over to Syria to fight on the side of ISIS, who we are told is supposed to be the enemy, justifying sending our sons and daughters into Syria. The U.S. government is literally running both sides of this coming war. Gee, I wonder who's going to win. Now there's a story, and we just put it up at whatreallyhappened.com, where there is a photograph that was taken of Iraq's pro-Iranian militias having a convoy driving across Iraq with all their flags on full display, and there on a heavy transport truck is an M1 Abrams tank. So, anyway. Now then, as you're aware, the gun grabbers are in high dudgeon. They're trying to totally disarm and make helpless the American people. Nobody's allowed to have guns. Nobody's allowed to have... And they're looking for reasons to bypass the Second Amendment. They're trying to declare that all returning veterans are mentally ill by default, and therefore they should not be allowed to have guns. And I understand why that represents an already trained military force present in the United States of America. And a lot of them are angry. 1/3 of America's homeless are returned veterans from the war zone. And the government's afraid of them. Talk about a lack of gratitude. These kids take the oath, put on the uniform, go do as they're told. They get dumped back in the United States of America out of work, homeless, and the government turns around and says, you're mentally ill. You're not allowed your rights. that you sacrifice so much for. And they're starting to get really silly in terms of reasons why somebody should not be allowed to have a firearms. And I love this one. This is reported over in Investment Watch blog. The new list of reasons why the Second Amendment doesn't apply to you. If you are on the Internet for long hours at a time, if you grieve for a loved one too long, or you are an Internet conspiracy theorist, you may be ineligible to own guns. I think I qualify on all three of those. It's just amazing. And the good news is they're getting very obvious. They're very heavy-handed about all this stuff. Remember that coffee mug we sell over at our online store? The fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force them to act like one where everybody can see it. And this ridiculous idea that returning veterans or people who spend a lot of time on the Internet are somehow not allowed to have guns. That's not in the Second Amendment. Not at all. And we have these enforcers of the orthodoxy out there now with absolutely insane things. Greenpeace, people who doubt human-caused global warming should be beheaded. USA Today, people who doubt the safety and efficacy of vaccines ought to be arrested and thrown in prison. Does that sound like discourse or open debate? No, it isn't. It's tyranny. You will believe what we tell you to believe and stop asking questions. Gandhi used to say it is the duty of a civil resistor to provoke a response. That's what we're doing here in the independent media. We're not committing any crimes, but we're provoking responses by the government, and the public sees those responses, and the public starts saying, this isn't the government that TV and film and school told me we had. If you are a user of virtual private networks on computers, apparently there is another huge security flaw that's been discovered. It's reported over at Torrent Freak. Apparently, using WebRTC, your home IP addresses are visible, which sort of undermines a major reason to have a virtual private network. Now, maybe it's a bug. Maybe it's another NSA backdoor. They're really very big on that. They want backdoors into everything. Now, here's a very interesting story. This is over at nationofchange.org, and they're talking about how broadcast networks covered climate change in 2014, and they're basically putting out that news coverage of global warming increased in 2014 after requests from a group of senators directing the corporate media to start pushing this agenda. When corporate media is out there with all of these stories about how 2014 was the hottest year on record, which, by the way, has already been discredited. It's not like they're going out there and saying, there's an issue here. They're getting their direction from the U.S. government. Meanwhile, as you heard on the SRN news break, there's another big chill coming into the Northeast. And it's not just here in the United States of America. Sweden is bracing for their coldest weekend of 2015. We're going to take a phone call here. Mo in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. How you doing?
Doing okay.
Hey, I'm glad that other caller straightened you out the other night.
Which caller was that?
The one who said, quit saying I got to get off.
Oh, yeah, that one. Yeah, okay.
Because you are extremely useful.
Well, thank you very much. And, I'm going to not use that one anymore. I got to think of a new catchphrase to sign the show off with,
Now, everybody appreciates you that I know. Trust me. You do a great job. You do like it is.
Thank you. Just going to keep on going.
I have a little comment to make on you. I know you mentioned the Fraternal Order of Police. I've been catching just bits, and I've been busy here. I've been trying to catch as much shows as I could, but I know you mentioned the Fraternal Order of Police, and I was just going to say, you're probably aware of this, but most of those organizations they use that name, Fraternal Order of Police and collections, and 99% of the money they take in goes to the salaries and fat cats.
Yes.
And it's just a big scam. It's just a huge scam when they call and intimidate people, try to get them to give in. I used to rent a space when I started my business years ago, 40 years ago, and upstairs was the Fraternal Order Police. I used to go up there and watch them do the collections. It was a joke. It was pathetic. It actually made me sick. It's just a total scam. I'm not saying every one of them. Maybe they're all different, but most of them are just ways to just squeeze people for money, and most of that money goes to salaries. But anyways, I'll hang up and get your comments. Thanks.
Well, no, you're absolutely right, and I'm not going to cast aspersions on any one organization, but it's certainly a well-known trick of organized crime to basically form these organizations, collect a bunch of money, and not really do anything for the rank and file, just pay themselves really huge salaries. And they'll go out and make speeches and photo ops to make it look like they're doing something, but really it's just another way to get money from the so-called union members or so forth. We know there's a lot of phony charities that operate that way, where they're raising huge amounts of money to protect baby seals on the ice floes off and whatever, and the money mostly is spent on huge salaries and advertising, and very little of it goes to the stated cause. Now, for those that are operating under tax-exempt status, they're required by law to document that half the money they take in is going to do what they say they're going to do. But there's a large number of charities that don't bother applying for tax-exempt status, and they're just taking in the money, and maybe a few percent actually get spent doing some good, and the rest is just put in their pockets. It really is another form of scam. We're a nation of the scammers, by the scammers, and for the scammers. We will be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show, and more developments from Donetsk. As we've already reported, and ITAR-TASS is confirming, the Donetsk People's Republic's militia have scored a major victory. They have surrounded 8,000 Kiev forces who are apparently in the process of surrendering and, in fact, joining the other side, along with a huge amount of artillery. And now we're hearing that some of the artillery that Donetsk has now captured from the Kiev forces include what is being called the Peony, which is a self-propelled 203-millimeter cannon. It is a tank destroyer. And apparently, as the Kiev forces were fleeing, trying to get away, they simply abandoned these in place. Left them in pristine condition. This is a major piece of artillery. It's designed to destroy tanks, including modern American battle tanks. It's a huge, huge shell. I don't think Poroshenko is going to be in charge of Ukraine much longer. All righty. Now then, we are seeing a continuation of this attempt by the U.S. government to divide the nation against itself. And they're pushing even harder. The U.S. government is terrified of all Americans standing together as an American people, pointing the finger of blame at Washington, D.C. and Wall Street for all that's going on. And the U.S. government has for decades played this game of turning Americans against each other. Black against white, young against old, men against women. To keep us angry with each other, hating each other, so that we forget that all of the problems we're dealing with come from a single source. Wall Street and Washington, D.C. And they're really trying to push this whole idea of a racial crisis, black against white, here in the United States of America. Now, apparently there was this recent music video calling for the police to be killed. And it was out there and everybody was saying, see, the people are getting ready to rise. We've got to get armor and weapons and machine guns for the police here. And there's a little bit of an embarrassment because apparently one of the locations this video was shot at has been identified from the video as being a New York City-funded law firm, which tells us this video is another bought and paid for piece of propaganda to create the illusion of a crisis to which the city will be forced to respond with heavier weapons for the police and fewer rights and liberties for the people here. Now, getting on back to the black versus white issue, there is supposedly a documentary, and I think we should call it a mockumentary because I'm already suspicious about this, called The End Game. And it's supposed to be about the full white genocide. And very clearly, just looking at the trailer for this, it is designed to inflame race hatred. And I don't know, based on what happened over at the Benghazi consulate, there may not even be a movie, just a trailer. We'll put out a trailer and we'll kick off riots and we'll say it's all the fault of the movie and declare martial law and the rest of it. But I want you to just understand that basic concept, that the videos and articles and movies that are out there saying you should hate X. If you're white, you should hate the blacks. If you're black, you should hate the whites. If you're straight, you should hate the gays. If you're women, you should hate the men. Those are all being initiated by a government that is desperate to divide and conquer the American people to keep us their slaves. Don't fall for it. They've been doing it for decades. They were doing it during the 1960s. COINTELPRO. Remember the Black Panther coloring book? Turned out the Black Panthers had nothing to do with it. So all these undercover FBI informants trying to cause trouble, to get people hating each other, angry with each other, fighting with each other, so that we're not an inconvenience to the money junkies and their lackeys in Washington, D.C., and they're trying to play it again. So please don't fall for it. And of course, they're still trying to get you to hate all the Muslims. You know, anything bad happens, it's radical Islam, as opposed to radical Christianity or radical Judaism. Those are good, but radical Islam, that's bad here. A very interesting story out of Mike.com, and it's talking about a recent article that came out from a computer security website that listed the most common passwords people use to protect their data and why they're so easy to guess by computer hackers. And the article basically said, if this is your password, change it. Strengthen your password. And this article goes on to point out that Obama's cybersecurity push, his new law, is so broadly written that the article advising you to strengthen your password is itself a felony. And we have seen this time and time again. The U.S. government will say, this is a problem, and then they'll write a law that's so badly worded it is easy to use it for other purposes. To shut people down. To oppress the public. To justify confiscation of their assets. Now, we've been talking about this issue of content piracy. And being somebody who's involved in film and television and music, I think piracy is wrong. Pardon me. I do support the fair use doctrine, where you will comment on other people's copyrighted works. But we have seen the entertainment industry blaming content pirates for their declining revenues. And I was saying that maybe the entertainment industry was scapegoating piracy for their own poor decisions. And in particular, we were looking at the music industry, and their sales are in major decline, even with Miley Cyrus naked on a wrecking ball. And the reason for that is less piracy and more the fact that corporately produced rock music really isn't the same as the rock revolution that we all lived through in the 1960s, if you're my age or older. Because the content isn't there. What made the rock music catch on was they were talking about what was going on. Wars, greed, social issues. Today's rock music has adopted the look and feel of the rock music, but the lyrics are pointless. They're vapid. They're empty. And I think that's a big part of it. And now there's another indicator that this may be true. We'll talk about it when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the entertainment industry and its tendency to blame declining revenues on those gosh darn content pirates. And I know piracy is an issue, and it's a problem, but I think it's also been a scapegoat for the entertainment industry, who have been making very poor decisions. And part of the problem is, and we saw this all the way back in the McCarthy era, the really creative people got driven out of Hollywood, and today everybody who's working in the entertainment industry is allowed to be there because they're politically correct. We're politically correct. We won't have an original thought in our head. I think a good example of that is they're going to remake Ghostbusters with an all-female cast. And I'm okay with that, but I noticed that the feminists who were out there screaming that the original Ghostbusters was sexist for an all-male cast aren't out there saying that it's now sexist because it's an all-female cast. A little double standard there. But we've all seen what's going on. I was talking about corporately produced music may cloak itself in the look and feel of rock and roll, but it doesn't have the content. Modern lyrics, it's devoid of any real meaning, or it's simply not allowed on the air. And everything's a remake, a redo, make it just like that, only slightly different. I mean, Hollywood is producing very few original pieces of work. And I think what supports this is we're now getting a report from iTunes that old albums from the 60s, 70s, and 80s are outselling current albums on iTunes. And that right there tells you that the corporately produced entertainment just isn't finding its audience. Because it's all designed by marketing people. Oh, well, this album did really good. We'll do something that looks kind of like it, but just slightly different. And when it all looks the same, they're basically dividing the audience. You've bought one album, you've basically bought every album that's going to come out this year. And they try and market it with personalities and, hot babes and hot hunks out there. But it's not really a good way. If your business is entertainment, you'd better entertain, or you're not going to be in business very, very long at all. Very interesting story over digitalmusicnews.com about an individual who has put his music for monetization on YouTube. And according to YouTube, his music videos got 151,000 plays, for which he received a grand total of $10. And we've seen the same thing here. Claire's music is out on iTunes. We're always getting emails from people who bought and downloaded the album and, oh, it's great and everything, but I think it's been 2 years since we actually got anything out of it. Alrighty, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Wes in Idaho. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. 2 points. Did you know that Dr. Sherry Tenpenny had to cancel a dozen speaking engagements coming up in Australia because of threats of violence? She is an anti-vaccination spokesperson.
Yes, I'd heard that.
Oh, okay. The Biomat, a far infrared heating pad, Boeing, Microsoft, and the Seahawks are using these doggone things because they're so good and effective. Did you know that one?
Good and effective to do what?
Health-wise, of course. I mean, they want to get as much production out of their workers as possible, and it is helpful to do that.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of stuff that's out there that can be good and efficacious. The problem is we're also being sold a lot of junk. And the terror threats against Sherry Tenpenny is part of the larger pattern. We were talking about this column that came out in USA Today this week, basically saying that anybody who doubts vaccines ought to be thrown in jail. I understand. Yeah. I understand that out in California, doctors are starting to put up signs in their office saying that if the child is not vaccinated for measles, the doctor will not see them, which I think is a violation of the Hippocratic Oath. But listen, the good news is, if the kid didn't get the measles vaccine, he's not likely to get the illness because the measles is hitting the people who get the vaccines.
I know. I am very much a anti-vaccination person. I've handed out 4,000 or 5,000 cards, vaccination fact sheet cards. I've got letters to the editor printed in newspapers. I've got hundreds and more like thousands of posts on YouTube about vaccinations. I know of a Dr. Ted Corin who prints up a poster. It says autism is just the tip of the iceberg, and then he points out 50 other diseases that are caused by vaccinations. Myself, I, just like Montel Williams, had an adverse reaction to a vaccination many years ago, and now I, like Montel Williams, have multiple sclerosis.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, and I understand that there is some research to suggest a link. I know that the exploding epidemic of peanut anaphylaxis coincides with the use of peanut oil as an adjuvant in vaccines. Now, peanut oil is something you're supposed to eat and digest, not shove into your blood veins. And but vaccines are big business. That's the new model. Selling medicine to people who are already sick, that's just a small market. We need to sell medicine to people who are already healthy. And there's billions and billions of dollars on the line, which is why you're going to see people like Sherry Tenpenny be threatened with their lives, loss of their lives, to protect the profits. Because in this economy, if there's a significant reduction in people buying vaccines, some of these pharmaceutical companies are going to go out of business.
I tell the story, Paul Harvey reported on it, that a young girl died after kissing her boyfriend. Her boyfriend had just eaten a peanut butter sandwich. Yes, adjuvant, peanut oil being used as an adjuvant in vaccination is most certainly the cause. I mean, peanut oil is never, by natural, never to go into the bloodstream unaltered like that. When you eat peanuts, your body has all the opportunity to change it before it goes into the bloodstream. But it's totally unnatural to put peanut oil into the bloodstream. But that's exactly what's done with the vaccination. They use the oil as a...
Wes, I want to get a comment in here so that people understand what we're talking about. The way vaccines are formulated today, they'll put a pathogen, hopefully weakened, and then in order to provoke your body to respond to it, they will add the adjuvants, which are other chemicals that are in there to stimulate an immune response. And the theory is that your body will develop an immune response to that pathogen that's in the vaccine. The problem is your body will also develop an immune response to all of the adjuvants themselves, including the peanut oil. That's the problem. It's a very reckless way of dealing with this whole approach, and it really has become a major, major problem. And they understand people are becoming very reluctant to trust the medical establishment, and that's why you have death threats against people speaking out against vaccines. You have USA Today saying anybody who doubts vaccines ought to be thrown in prison. It's my First Amendment right to ask questions about the safety and efficacy of these products, especially when we look at government agencies who are clearly looking the other way, like CDC knew there was a link between vaccines and sudden infant death syndrome and kept it under wraps. Got to take a break for commercials. We got one more call when we come back. Stay tuned. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And speaking about vaccines and the rest of it, the Super Bowl is on alert for terrorism, but a more serious issue that the Arizona officials are looking at is how to deal with the fact that all these people are coming in from all around the country during this measles outbreak, and how do we prevent measles from being spread all across the country when all these people go back home. And that's not entirely without merit. People who model biological warfare attacks have said major sporting events, that's where you do it. That's where you do it. In fact, that was even described in Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six. We're going to take a phone call here, last phone call of the day, of the week, of the month. Steve in Florida. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Howdy, Mike. I have just a question for you. It's been in the back of my mind, and I can't figure it out. Maybe you can shed some light on it. You discuss a lot how the people that don't have the money are getting fleeced with like grocery prices and these red light cameras and so forth, and you can't contest it. It's for $450 just to take it, to take it to court. Nickel and diamond, the poor people.
Yes.
But I was wondering why and when, or are they fleecing the millionaires? No, I'm not talking about billionaires, because you give a millionaire a $200 fine for running a red light, whatever. Okay, that's not the same as giving somebody, living hand to mouth kind of thing. Okay, so, but the millionaires have a little bit of clout. They're lawyers and doctors, and that make good money. And have a somewhat secure job. Okay, what? That's what I don't get is like when are they fleecing the millionaires, not the billionaires, but the mere millionaires?
Yeah, they are, and the issue is, as you correctly point out, for somebody who's struggling just to get by, it's a major problem. For the millionaires, it's a minor annoyance. And that is really the difference. But we've become a very predatory economy with the people on the very top just looting everybody who's below them. And the reason the economy is failing is because there is no longer a mechanism by which wealth can recirculate down to the worker level for them to feed back into the pyramid. That's the part that's missing now, and that's why it's all going to come down.
Right. But my question, Mike, is more like, a doctor or even a lawyer or whatever, they get charged an extra, or, whatever, they get charged an extra, like say $10,000 for something. And, they watch their money. But they have more clout than say like I would. And
I'm not really understanding what it is you're trying to say, and I think you need, when you call into the show, you need to sort of have a clear picture in your mind what you're going to say, because frankly, you've lost me at this point. If you're talking about things like traffic fines, they're applied equally to everybody, but of course it is much more painful for the people who are down at the bottom of the economic pyramid. We already have stories of people who are going to jail because they can't afford to pay these traffic fines. People who are in the upper middle class, it's annoying, but it's not life disrupting. They'll just pay it and grumble a little bit about how their insurance rates are going to go up, and they get on with life. So is the system fair? Well, it's kind of hard to say. But at this point, the macro universe of our economy in the United States is that it's missing an important part of that life cycle, which is that somehow money must be taken from the greedy ones at the top and somehow brought back down to the bottom level as decent wages and salaries so that workers can feed that new wealth back into the bottom of the pyramid to keep the economy running. And that's the part that has collapsed, and that's why the pyramid is doomed.
Right. Okay. If I could try one more time, I don't know, like just I get on the radio and just my mind kind of goes blank.
I understand. I used to be that way myself when I first started on this stuff a long time ago. But okay, real quick, one more try because we're coming up to the end of the show.
Okay. Now, the people that are more influential in society. Okay, if you start pissing them off, it's going to,
Okay,
there's going to be
Steve.
more backlash.
Okay, you may be right here. I think I understand what you're trying to say here, and you're actually right, because as the poor working class runs out of money, which they already have, the lower middle class is out of money, the middle class is out of money, the money junkies are going to start to turn their predations to the higher and higher levels. And a lot of these,
that was my question.
A lot of these upper middle class people who've been supporting the status quo because they shared in the profits are all of a sudden going to realize that those top 1%ers have no loyalty to them. And the 1%ers are going to steal from the rich because the poor don't have anything anymore. And the rot is going to spread up until, just like any other third world nation, all the wealth is concentrated in a few individuals at the very top, and everybody else is absolutely dirt poor. Steve, I got to let you go. We're almost out of time here, and I got to finish up here before we hit the top of the hour news break here. Interesting little story, and this crosses a lot of barriers. Blacklisted News reporting on a former FBI assistant director came out and said it was FBI policy that all their reports that would go to the government would just hype the fear, you're in danger, terrorists, blah, 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 in order to keep their budgets high. Their reports were biased by the need to keep their budgets high by constantly presenting to the government that there's some kind of a threat out there the FBI can deal with. And this is paired with a rather interesting article we just linked to whatreallyhappened.com about how the Motion Picture Association of America is not about protecting motion pictures, but preserving the existing status quo production and distribution off of which they are paid. And this is why they are so hostile to alternative means of distribution which might be outside their control. And it is certainly true that people's worldview depends on what they're being paid to do. Look at the witchcraft trials in Europe. We all know there are no real witches. Yes, I understand there are people who have a religion that says they're witches, but they're not up there on the broomsticks interfering with air traffic control. They're not turning into animals at the crossroads at midnight. But in the Middle Ages in Europe, people were paid to say, yes, there are witches out there and they're doing all this stuff, and burn them at the stake and I get a piece of the action. And that, unfortunately, that attitude that I'll believe in whatever I'm paid to believe in has come to dominate American morality, and I think it's a source of major problems. People who are profiting from vaccines will be out there saying, yes, they're safe and effective. I don't want to look at the evidence they're causing harm because I'm making too much money. I'm well funded to prove human-caused global warming, and I don't see the snow and the ice all over the Northeast, and you can't make me. And it hammers home the point that this lust for ink and paper pieces has destroyed what was best in the American character, those aspects of our morality that made our nation great in the past. And we've traded it away. We've allowed it to be siphoned off. That bottom line on the ledger is now the only measure of our worth as individuals, as companies, as a nation. And that is a tremendous loss. And I've got nothing against people who want to be rich. I'd like to be rich myself. But there has to be a balance between acquisition of wealth and what is best for the nation and its people. There's the music. It's Pauhana Friday. We're going to get out of here, and I'm going to spend some time with my lady love here this evening. We'll be back on Monday here on the Genesis Communication Network. So until then, have a good weekend. Aloha, America.